Now, if you think about the fact that they're using humanoid robots in all sorts of applications now, there was a video I saw the other day of humanoid robots already in China being used as part of a police force. So that's where we are right now, this very time. So if you think about it in 10, 15, 20 years, there's going to be machines running around autonomously underground, and where you need manual intervention, it's probably going to be robots that are going to be doing it. So I see this evolution as being really quite continuous and much faster in the future than it's ever been before.
Righto, buddy biders, we've got a bloody special standalone interview here. Quite pertinent in the lead up to the GRX conference in Brisbane in May coming up. It is centred around technology, innovation, excellence in the mining industry, and we've pretty much found the nucleus of tech and innovation in the mining industry. This bloke has been on every single board that has had something to do with tech, I'd say, in the mining industry. Alan Broome, absolute honour to have you on the show. Cobber, welcome.
Thanks, Matt, and I'm very pleased to be here. Hopefully I can make some sensible comments. We'll see.
Oh, don't worry, mate. I'll offset them against my ones. So, mate, it is it's a great industry we're in at the moment. In turn, everything's going to be on show at GRX, but like tech and innovation is probably and coupled with AI, the buzzword at the moment, what the future of the mining industry is going to look like is more complex and unknown than ever. So I guess in this yarn, we want to go through the history of the mining industry and the tech innovations, where we've been, where we're at, and where we're going. So let's take it away, because I think in Australia, you could say automation and everything hasn't really taken off widespread, but your leaders like your Rio Tinto and BHP and the iron ore have just really, they're miles above the pack with automation, you'd say, whereas I'm the underground mining guy, and it probably just hasn't hit us yet. So what's your view on, I guess, the last few decades and where automation and tech have gone to?
Well, that's a really good question, because I think if you look back, let's look back 50 years. You know, where was Australian mining 50 years ago? It was a very manually orientated industry. We were mainly focused on producing gold in places like Kalgoorlie and other places in Western Australia. We had Broken Hill, which was mainly lead and zinc, and a lot of that equipment was fairly fundamental equipment at the time. And up in Queensland, we're out at Mount Isa with MIM, and not with MIM in the first place, but looking at copper developments in that part of the world. It wasn't automated, but it wasn't really manual. There was a lot of robust equipment, but there was a lot of manpower required to operate it. So it was a very labour-intensive industry that was looking for ways to go forward. And I think, as we grew as an industry, as mining in Australia grew as an industry, we became more sophisticated, and we did more and more and bigger things. And, effectively, I think we sort of morphed into, the production of iron ore in the Pilbara through a number of steps. And, the big operators in the Pilbara are now, Rio Tinto, Fortescue, BHP. And we also grew in coal. And if you remember, BHP got involved in hard coking coal in the Bowen Basin through the acquisition of Utah in the first place. And then more and more evolution of that. So we morphed from a small mining project orientated industry to a large mining project orientated industry. And with that came technological steps along the way, which improved things. I mean, in the first instance, I remember that when I joined the industry, more than a couple of weeks ago, there was still the only pit pony still operating in Australia was operating up in the northern part of Queensland, and pulling carts along a roadway with a pit pony. We now operate longwall mines that are almost close to being fully automated. So we've morphed into a really high-tech industry, and most people don't actually see how that's evolved, but it's evolved really, in my view, fairly rapidly. I think the next piece is going to be the really exciting bit, because, as you just said, Matty, you don't see automation in underground to the degree that we see automation in surface mining. it's only going to be a matter of minutes away, because all the big underground mining equipment manufacturers have now developed, what are really fully autonomous mining and transport equipment, and they're being deployed not only in Australia but in global mining industries, and they're going very successfully. So it's been an evolution of an industry. We're talking about an industry that's over 10% of Australian GDP, which is pretty impressive. But I think the point that you make about technology, if you add in the Australian MET sector, which is mining equipment, technology and services, the people in that industry sector collectively turns over another 160 billion Australian dollars. So if you add the mining bit to the METS bit, all of a sudden the GDP impact on Australia goes from 10% to 12%. So it's a fairly big component of what we do in mining, the evolution of technology and the introduction of technology.
Alan, I'm keen to look to the future now, as you kind of painted the picture there, and get your take on what a mine, say if we're talking about 10 or 20 years in the future, what that kind of looks like. We had this discussion with a couple other guests not too long ago, and it was a super interesting discussion to kind of get into the ramifications of what a world looks like in a fully automated underground environment, and where kind of government regulation and everything pushes you. How do you kind of see that?
Well, I think you've just hit it on the head. It's not government regulation that will require the industry to actually work more and more with more innovative solutions. It's really the industry itself that has to do that. Now, if I go back one step, at one point I chaired a joint venture between Rio Tinto Copper and Codelco. Codelco is the world's largest mining company. They operate the world's largest underground mine at El Teniente in Chile, and they've just constructed the world's second largest underground mine, which is the Chuquicamata underground copper mine, which is below the original copper open cut pit that they operated.
That's the best pronunciations I've ever seen from an Australian for those mines, Broome. Well done.
Thank you. Well, I've spent a lot of time in Chile, so people give me a hard time. I did a presentation to the Chilean equivalent of Austmine, who we actually helped develop in Chile, and they said, the next time you come here, you've got to do it in Spanish rather than in English, and that was a challenge. So anyway, I didn't do that, but I digress. The reason that I raise that is that when we were doing the work with Rio de Cobra, we were introducing automated surface equipment to both Rio Tinto and to Codelco, and we introduced the first of the very large automated, fully autonomous Komatsu fleets in both of those companies. And that was really a groundbreaking move. It's the first time we'd seen automated driverless trucks being introduced in South America, and the first time we'd seen it in Australia. And that made people stand up and say, well, that's really interesting. Why are you doing that? And the reason is efficiency. We were looking at, a machine that could be operated in longer periods with actually, in real terms, a better profile in terms of maintenance cost. So there were real good reasons for doing it, productivity and cost. That's now developed into the underground sector. And again, if I go back and use Chile as an example, those mining equipment manufacturers who manufacture gear for underground mines, they've actually got quite a lot of automated kit in places underground in those really deep mines. Chuquicamata, for example, is 1,600 metres. Their first shaft was 1,600 metres deep. They're deeper than that now. And, you've got rock temperatures of 60 degrees and they're running at a head grade around about 0.6, 0.7. So it's tough. And when you're operating in draw points to bring out large volumes of material, to try and do it with a manually operated machine is tedious at best, and it can be dangerous, and it can be really difficult to get people to operate. So what you do is you automate it. So they've automated that process. So if that's where we are today, to answer your question, Jonas, where are we going to be? I reckon we're going to see more and more automation. We're going to have more and more automation, in particular in underground, because I can be controversial here and say, most of the big surface mines in the world have already been developed. They're already there. There's going to be some that are developed as we go forward, but the real future is in underground mining. And in underground mining, it's going to be probably deeper, probably more difficult. So you've got to have more and more automation. So I think automation of underground is a big deal. And what do I see? I see the use of obviously autonomous systems being critical, but I also see the use of robotic systems being somewhat that we're going to have to adopt as an industry. I don't know whether you guys follow. There's an American company called Boston Dynamics, and they make humanoid robots. Now, if you think about the fact that they're using humanoid robots in all sorts of applications now, there was a video I saw the other day of humanoid robots already in China being used as part of a police force. So that's where we are right now, this very time. So if you think about it in 10, 15, 20 years, there's going to be machines running around autonomously underground, and where you need a manual intervention, it's probably going to be robots that are going to be doing it. So I see this evolution as being really quite continuous and much faster in the future than it's ever been before. So that's part of the answer, Jonas.
Yeah, because on the underground side of things, the argument will always be, like, if you look at open pits are, big or small. They're pretty they're homogenous in the style they're mined in a way, but it's just the size that varies. Where underground mines are like going to a pizza shop. There's about 27 different flavours of the way you can mine these, and then the scale of it is going to change. And I guess the focus has always been around how can automation help these small scale operations. So like on the smaller end of town for underground mining, do you think it's actually going to be automation that's going to be bigger, or technology advancements that makes what we're doing at the moment faster, or a good mix of both?
Probably the latter, because if you're a smaller operator, you're using smaller machines, maybe not, but you're certainly using less machines. There's less units in your fleet. So you're probably going to be using, more efficient, smaller number of machines, and they could be smaller machines. So I think it's in the second part of your answer. What I do see is that in the smaller mining operations, and probably in some of the bigger operations, I think that there's going to be a big focus on in situ mining, particularly in copper. So if I switch now to where is the future for mining in Australia and probably in the world, there's a huge deficit gap in the availability of copper going forward than right now. In other words, there's more demand for copper than there is the availability of copper, and it's driven by the electrification of the world, which is also driven by the decarbonisation of the world. The one metal that you can't have a direct replacement for is copper for the transmission of electricity. So you've got to get more copper. So it's going to be big companies that are focused on copper production, which is why BHP, for example, are really focused on the development of copper worldwide, and Austmine assists in that by running the Copper to the World conference in Adelaide every year. And we're going to have a lot of copper discussions at GRX as well in May. But the smaller operators are moving now to all sorts of systems, and it's not just automation. There's a couple of really interesting smaller operators that I know of in South Australia that are actually using in situ leaching of copper as potentially the way forward. What that means is you really don't put people in harm's way. You drill down to the ore body, you put in a lixivant, and then you pump the resultant material out and put it through a normal processing circuit to produce the ultimate metal that you're after.
Yeah, same as it's the copper equivalent of uranium.
Correct.
Effectively.
Yeah. That's exactly right.
I'm keen to press you on. I'm keen to press you on that, Alan. And here, like you sort of said, it's coming super, super quick. Have you got a sort of time frame in mind? Are we talking within the next 10 years we could see these dark style mines where you really don't need people running around? You can design them differently. The whole economics of the mine becomes different. Is that something you see before 2035, or is it a bit beyond that?
I actually do see it before 2035, Jonas, and the reason for that is it's going to be driven by the need. The one thing I will say is that, having said all those things about how wonderful the industry is, it's quite conservative. It's one thing to develop the technology, it's another thing to adopt it. And the one criticism I've always had of, in particular, the bigger mining companies of Australia in taking on new technologies, they like to be first to be second. The first thing they'll say to you is really, really interesting technology, really, really good idea. Who's using it? And if the answer is, well, we need to get somebody here to use it, come back and see us when you've got half a dozen companies using it, and we'll talk to you. So they like to be first to be second. So the adoption of the technology in Australia is somewhat challenging from time to time. Other nations take it up a lot quicker. But I think these things are going to actually accelerate really quickly. So if I can use an example, Austmine also ran an event in Newcastle about a month ago, 6 weeks ago. It was the Innovation Roadshow, and there was about 280 people attending, and we had about 40 small to medium METS companies presenting what they were talking about. A year ago, at the equivalent event, not one company talked about AI, not one. At this event, I would say 30% of the people who presented at that Innovation Roadshow talked about AI and the adoption of AI and how AI was going to improve what they were doing. So I think if that's an indicator, it says to me that the take-up of new technologies by industry is actually going to accelerate, and therefore the sorts of things we're talking about might start to become apparent, certainly by 2035.
These humanoid, these robots, like, God, if I was Bar Minco or Burncut for underground mining, I'd be looking at them ASAP, and because I just think on the back of what you said, and I've watched that same video you watched in China, it's phenomenal. Because what they could provide the underground mining industry, mostly for you train them to throw the bolts for the jumbo. You don't have you throw out all the procedures of stop and drill them while a person's out there. You can send them down in the smoke to water down headings, like you can do, and make the mine actually a lot safer. Is this getting talked about for underground yet? Because it should be.
It's not getting talked about for underground yet, but what is getting talked about is, in particular within Austmine, what are the adjacent industries that have got technologies that we might be interested in? And the humanoid robot, not to put too fine a point on it, humanoid robots are of great interest to the military. So the military have actually developed these technologies, particularly in places like the US and Europe and China, obviously. So the sophistication of the tool is quite well advanced in some of those adjacent industries. So one of the things that Austmine is looking at now is how do we work with adjacent industry sectors to bring those ideas into the mining industry. So it's not that we've got to invent it. It's what we've got to do is adapt it to our circumstances and our conditions to give us the improvement we're after. So, I don't see it as being a challenge to bring those into reality in a relatively short time frame. What's a relatively short time frame? I have no idea. But I'm watching those videos and I'm watching I'm amazed at the flexibility of these technologies and the way that they are doing things in other industry sectors.
Do you worry as well, to dive into the geopolitics a bit more? Like, China has raced ahead in the processing in particular. Do you have any concerns that they race ahead and they pull in their economics and they get even better and cheaper and more effective at mining across the board because they are clearly, or have been clearly over the past 10 years, better in innovation in parts?
I think you're absolutely right. I mean, the one thing that in one of my previous lives, I spent quite a bit of time in China, and everything, particularly in the mining sector, maybe not the coal sector, but certainly in a lot of the other hard rock sectors, it was, I would say, technologically behind the Western world in what they were doing. That's no longer the case. They are certainly innovators in their own right. They've developed a whole lot of new technologies, a whole lot of products, and you've seen some of them in the Western mining operations already. We're going to see more and more. So I think the Chinese really are going to be quite a formidable force in terms of mining technologies that can be used not only in China, and China is really a big unknown in terms of a lot of the materials that are yet to be discovered in China from a mining perspective. But I think we're going to see more and more of their products evolve into suitable solutions to the mining industry worldwide, including in Australia. So we'll see it turn up here, there's no doubt. And it's already turning up in places like South America.
Do you think this new wave of tech and automation and AI gives Australia maybe a chance to approach places like China on cost of operations, if we can, as you said, having less people, better tech, doing things quicker, and it sort of takes away that cost of labour differential? Is there a chance?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, we're talking about the most populous nation on earth, or second most populous nation on earth now. I think India's overtaken it in terms of population. So labour and labour cost in China is not as big an issue as it is here. I mean, one of the things that I always recall from when the autonomous fleet was introduced into Western Australia, it was replacing a person driving the truck that was probably getting paid $200,000+. You don't pay anybody in China at that level. So I don't think the labour cost or the utilisation of labour is such a big deal in China. I think the thing that drives the innovation of solutions and technology in China is finding better ways to do it. Not the cost, but just a better way of actually doing it. A better way of getting the outcome, and a more technologically superior outcome is what they're aiming for.
With let's go to give OpenPit a bit of love. I've watched many videos on the Rio Tinto's automation setup between the assaying, the trains, and the blending. It's a phenomenal operation in and hence why BHP and Rio's cost of production for their iron ore is just miles ahead of everyone in Australia. What is there much more big ticket items on the way to optimise bulk open pit haulage in iron ore in Australia? What are the big ticket items out there at the moment? Or are they pretty close to as optimised as they're going to get?
I think they've reached a certain point of equilibrium. I think they're not. There's probably going to be improvements made in the way in which the ore is dewatered and moved in the first instance. But if you look at what they've done in this last 15 years, the automation of the surface fleet, the automation of trains, the automation of drilling around the bench, all those things are already being done. And the drills now do onboard analytical determination, and in some cases strength determination of the rock that they're drilling through. So it's actually pretty advanced. So you've got to say, well, what else? What do we do next? I'm sure there's a shopping list that the people inside the machine would say, this is what I'd like to do. But I think we've reached a fairly significant point already in bulk mining, in iron ore.
Yeah, and they have the advantage of the capital and the scale, because they can set up control centres in Perth like they got at the airport, and BHP's in the city. Whereas, how do you think all that is the next step? Obviously, getting their level of automation and tech translated into smaller open pit operations and cost of capital not being such a burden to make that happen.
Yes, I think it is, and there's quite a large number of mining operators in Australia that are smaller operators, and overseas that are smaller operators, that want to do exactly what those big mining operations have done, and have operating centres outside of the mine itself, controlling what's going on in the mine. And in fact, there's quite a number of copper miners in Australia that are looking at setting up those centres within their own facilities at the moment. And I remember when we were working, and we continue to work as Australia very closely with other countries through the Austmine network. It's one of the things that we did get asked quite often in South America. How do we put in place an operations centre to make sure that we can improve the efficiency of our small to medium operation rather than a great big operation? And I think there's companies in Australia in the METS network that actually know how to do that, and I think that's a great advantage. One of the great things about Austmine is that we've got an international network like no other nation on earth. The way in which the Australian MET sector has developed relationships with the global mining industry, I think, is the envy of other mining nations. So that's a long-winded way of saying, when one of those miners in Bolivia wants to find an answer, they ask, can Australia provide this answer? Which is a really good thing, a really good position for us to be in.
And so which tech companies are sort of leading the pack in that side of things, open pit automation on smaller scales?
Well, it depends on which particular part of the spectrum you're looking at. You're talking about material movement, or you're talking about, AI, the adoption of AI. There's probably about 60 companies now that are members of the Austmine network that can provide part of an AI product improvement program for an operational perspective at all of those operations, whether they be big or small. So there's a huge list of companies that can do that. And, it'd be wrong to sort of pick two or three. I reckon that there's just, depending on the challenge, depending on what they're after, there's any number of Australian companies that can provide those answers. Don't lose sight of the fact that what I said before about that innovation workshop, things have moved so quickly in the last 12 months that there are more and more companies being able to provide those solutions now than there were 1 or 2 years ago.
Alan,
And in particular, just to digress, I think back let's say 5 years ago, the use of data analytics in mining wasn't something that was on everybody's lips. Now it is. One of my criticisms of the Australian industry is I don't think we've been fast enough in adopting the use of data analytics to optimise our processes and optimise the way we recover our mined products. We haven't been as fast as some other industry sectors, and maybe we haven't been as fast as some other mining industries around the world. So, expanding the use of data analytics is something that I think is going to happen, and it hopefully will happen a lot faster than it has previously.
So do you still hold that criticism, or is that sort of passed on a bit?
I do still hold that criticism. Yeah, I think there's always, back to my comment about being first to be second. It's a bit like when you go and talk to people and go, what are you doing about collecting data and analysing that data automatically for the operation of your processing plant? And the answer is, well, we produce some spreadsheets and we look at those occasionally. I visited one mine site that said, well, we put all that information into a spreadsheet and we look at it every 3 weeks. Well, there's places in the world that look at that information every 3 seconds, not every 3 weeks. So if you want to optimise the performance of your business, you really do need to be a bit more, if you like, aware of the way in which you can get improvements a lot quicker. So I still have that criticism, yes.
When you think about the sort of innovation that you've seen over the past few decades, if we break it out into like the major mining houses, the Rios and BHBs of the world, the established METS companies, Orica, Index and the like, or just startups that spring up, who are the ones that drive the bulk of the innovation, or is it relatively spread?
I think there's two parts to your answer. I think the METS industry itself is probably the really heavy driver of innovation that goes from those developers of the solutions into the industry. In other words, they think about the problem that the industry may be having, or a company may have, or a mine might have, and they look at a way to fix the problem and they come up with a solution. And the solution is inevitably a commercial solution. So they take the commercial solution to the mining company and say, look, we've got a way of fixing a problem. So the answer to your question in that instance is it's being developed by the innovative METS companies themselves. They get the answer and take it to the industry. The other part of the answer is that in the true sense of cooperation, the companies that you mentioned, Rio Tinto, BHP and other large mining companies, they have developed a process where they put together a group of people that say, well, here are our problems in our business. How do we bring partners into the tent on that to solve those problems? How do we get innovation in our operations to make them better than they were? For example, and again, I'll use a Chilean example. When Codelco were looking at the way to improve the efficiency of the recovery from their heap leach operations, and heap leach, you build a heap out of the ore, you put sulfuric acid on the top of it, you produce a leachate, which is copper sulfate, and then you put the copper sulfate solution through a SXEW plant or something similar. They would typically get 93, 94% recovery. So what they did is said, well, that's not good enough. We need to get better recovery at that. And they looked at the way in which they could use naturally occurring microbes that occur within the ore body and develop a bioleaching process that was actually really, really robust. So in order to do that, they got hold of one of the world's best biotechnology companies, which just happened to be Japanese, not Australian, but at least it was a company that had a solution. And they formed a joint venture to look at the way in which they can introduce a bioleaching technology that would improve the way that they could recover copper in heap leach. They actually developed microbes that could operate at pH 1, which is pretty cool. And they got their recovery up to 98% plus out of the same heap. Now, that technology was developed in cooperation between the miner and the technology provider. That's how they got to the solution. And that, if I can roll forward, is now a company that Rio Tinto have just launched, which is actually a bioleaching company. And they've done exactly the same thing. They've formed a relationship with a company that could provide a solution. They formed a bioleaching company, and that's now going out into the industry. So the second way of doing it is for the bigger mining houses and large and medium-sized mining houses to form cooperative relationships with the METS companies that might be able to provide solutions and work on the problem jointly to come up with an answer.
Do you think automation and technology in processing is probably the one that's not talked about enough, but the one that could actually provide the most tangible benefits to an operation? Like talking about what you just mentioned there, like the talks about in situ recovery of minerals other than uranium. Like it's sort of a bit of a quantum shift in thinking. But is that the sort of stuff that's really going to be game changers?
Without a doubt, and I agree with you. I think we've actually, as an industry, I think we've spent a lot of time on finding it and digging it out, and not an equivalent amount of time on how do we get it out of the ore and get it into the hands of the customer. So the processing side of things is an area where there has been a lot of focus. And if you look at, I think we should be very proud of the fact that in Australia we've got the CSIRO, and the CSIRO have got a mineral sector group who work with the industry on looking at ways, in particular, on identifying ways to get better recovery out of the ore, i.e. through processing. And that's both from the point of view of processing the ore and also analysing the ore and saying, well, we've now analysed it, or this is a way to analyse it, and we know how to go about getting it out. And you've only got to look at some of the stuff that they've actually done, which, is revolutionary. I mean, there's one Australian METS company that licensed some technology from the CSIRO to automate the gold analysis technology and replace what is effectively the traditional way of analysing for gold, which is through a metallurgical process using platinum crucibles. That particular technology has now been adopted by a lot of gold companies around the world. It was developed by the CSIRO originally, licensed by a METS company, and they're taking that technology to the world. So there's definitely areas where people are doing it, but there's still a lot of scope. I remember some work that was being done, again, in the Rio Tinto era when they were working in this area. They were using microwaves as a way of producing micro cracking in the ore that they were mining. So they'd mine the ore, the copper ore, with maybe a 50 millimetre top size, 50 or 60 millimetre top size, and they'd put that through a very, very, very sophisticated microwave environment. And the microwaves, naturally, as you know, if you put a plate in the microwave that's got a gold rim on it, you get sparks everywhere. Microwaves heat up metals quicker than they heat up anything else. So if there's any concentration of metal in that 50 millimetre top size rock, it heats up really, really quickly and then cracks the rock. And that's important because it does two things. It allows you to differentiate the ore that's got a lot of metal in it versus ore that's not got a lot of metal in it. And you use, heat sensing tomography that says, there's the good stuff, there's the not so good stuff. So you can immediately automate it on ore sorting program ahead of where you were before. But because you've micro-cracked the unit of ore by using microwaves, you use less energy then to break it down to its next size. So when you put it in the rod mill or the ball mill, you actually use a lot less energy to break it down. So there's another example of technological introduction of ideas into the processing side of life to improve the efficiency of recovery.
Oh, you've seen what the difference between operations that have to grind to 120 micron compared to grinding to 75 micron. Like the incremental money that you save on power is huge. And
it is.
That's just from a metallurgy side. But if you introduce other stuff to help with it, you soon make the cash back. Mate, underground is, and I might be a bit harsh on underground sometimes in terms of innovation. It's just like, yes, it is the same processes as we've already done, but like, look, awesome advancements in like underground, like tele-remote bogging over since I started, like controlling 5 boggers at once, like that's unbelievable what they can do now. A lot of automated production drilling on rigs from upstairs and everything. So there has been a lot of technological advancements. It's just such a custom environment to try and apply it in on small scales. But I guess we're in underground mining. As you said, it's the future of mining. Where do you see a lot of work being directed towards at the moment?
I
You need to get the trucks automated. That's the big one. If you can automate a truck.
Yeah, you do. You need to get the trucks automated. But I think also in is there a better way of driving headings? I mean, jumbos are nice, and we all love automated jumbos. They're great. But is there a better way of doing that? And I've always been interested in what does the industry think about driving a heading, and do we stick with jumbos for driving roadways and all the other areas where we use a jumbo? Do we use jumbos forever? And I don't think the answer is there. I think there's all sorts of new cutting technologies that are being developed and introduced, and I think that's probably an area where we're going to see some substantial improvements over the next 10 years. I've seen some pretty interesting equipment that's been developed by some of the companies that are well known to the industry, and some of the innovative solutions that they've come up with, yet to be proven and yet to be commercialised, but they've certainly got, high prospect of being adopted as they go forward. I mean, there's one thing though, as I said at the start of all this, if you come up with a better mousetrap, you've got to find somebody who wants to use a better mousetrap. So that's always going to be a challenge. Is this more efficient, more effective, and safer to operate than a jumbo? And if the answer to all those questions is yes, then it'll find a place really quickly. So I think drivage is a big deal.
And it could be like a two-step process. I know they've done they did the trial. I think it was at Hillgrove's Canman 2, I think it's pronounced. They did that sort
Canman
of
2,
it was like a road continuous miner for the portal. I know they trialled it there. And look, in underground hard rock, it might be as simple as like some pre-cracking mechanism to make it easier to do that, but just something that mitigates can you imagine mitigating blast fumes as frequently so you don't have shift handovers, re-entries, and like you're actually continuously mining instead of blasting? You probably won't get away with it on production, but I'll see what you're saying. It's like it's probably going to take a while, but once that gets cracked and you can get a similar advance per shift as a jumbo, without having to exit the mine for blasting as frequently. I think that's right. I mean, I can recall being underground back to Chile, back to El Teniente, which is the world's largest underground mine. This is a very deep mine, and they have, and you'd be familiar with this, Paddy, they have rock bursts, right? And rock bursts are very dangerous and they kill people. I don't miss them flying at me face. I had them at one or two joints. God.
So you've got to find a way to mitigate that. And the way that they mitigated that particular situation was to use directional long hole drilling ahead of the face. So they'd drill out into the ore body ahead of the face and had two effects. Frankly, from an exploration perspective, it's pretty interesting. But what it did, it allowed some stress relief of the ore body. So they would reduce the risk of rock burst. But it also allowed the ability to apply some unique rock breaking technologies, and there's a number, not just sort of drilling things. You pump water down, do it hydraulically. There's now an electromagnetic, I think it's magnetic anyway. There's an electronic technology of being able to get a rock breaking technology ahead of the face. If you can do that, that will improve the ability then to cut faster in those drivages, which basically says you can use some of these more, rotary methods rather than, a jumbo.
Mate, they all get paid $2,500 a shift now on the jumbo, so if they can remove that, you're going to save a fortune.
Don't say that too loud. You won't get too many.
No, I'm not on it anymore, so I don't care.
If we stay on the capital side of things, and look specifically at the juniors, do you think that is the startups trying to make these innovations, Alan? Is there like a deep enough capital markets? Is there a lot of risk capital? Because Aussies don't have a problem punting on an exploration stock, but it doesn't carry the same sort of appeal for the Mets plays. How do you see the sort of level of sophistication in the capital market side of things?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and you know, I'll give you an answer in three parts this time. The first observation is that you know, we're one of two or three markets in the world that actually understand mining. So, you know, the capital markets in Australia, the capital markets in Canada, and to a lesser degree, the capital markets in London understand mining because they've been at it for quite some time. As somebody who, you know, chairs a number of junior mining companies, I can tell you that the capital markets have been tough for the last 4 years. Trying to raise capital for a junior miner is really challenging, and it's been challenging for 4 years, and I'm not sure that it's improved much in the last 12 months. You've also got to be very careful with the material that you're trying to raise capital for. You can raise capital at the moment for gold for the obvious reason, and you can raise capital for copper, again, for the obvious reason. If you've got something that's not in those two areas, then you're going to find it challenging. So the first part of the answer is, you know, the capital markets have been not as exciting as they should be for the juniors over this last 4 years. Let's hope it improves. And when we start to look at the development of critical minerals in Australia, if the capital market doesn't understand the difference between gold and, I don't know, pick something, zinc, it ain't going to be able to understand the difference between gold and something in the critical mineral space. In other words, it's going to be even more challenging to raise capital. In terms of the METS sector, there's not a large number of METS companies, in particular junior METS companies, who go to the market and attempt to raise cash. Because it would be fair to say that, in my experience, in Australia, the capital markets don't understand the METS sector. It's a service industry, and there's not a great big appetite for that. So that's a hard gig. There are some that have done it and some that have been successful, but it's a challenging environment. The other part of the answer is that there are companies that are specialised investment companies that focus on the MET sector, and some of those are really good and do a really good job. There's a company in West Australia that started as a private equity investor in mining, and they've now branched out into putting private equity capital into startups in the MET sector, and they've been quite successful at what they've done. And they've got a bigger appetite, and it's got bigger and bigger. And there's a number of other companies that are now looking at exactly the same model. So the answer is not obvious. You know, if you've got a really, really smart company and a smart group of executives that can get it on the market and grab hold of the capital market investors, and they understand it, then you'll get it away. If not, you won't, and it'll be even more challenging.
What sort of incentives do you think companies are going to need to adopt new technology that may come at the cost of reduced production for an interim period? Because number one bloody priority for all these companies usually is share price, but that's why everyone sticks to the norm, because you can forward look what you're going to get. You can predict it easier, even though they still miss it anyway. But is it going to be government funding or something to incentivise giving new tech a crack?
I don't think government funding is the answer. I think government already fund the development of new mining technologies in various ways. They do it through the CSIRO, for example. And I think we should be, I mention that again because we should be very proud of the fact that the CSIRO do what they do in mining and mining technology solution development in Australia. They also do it, by the way, there's a CSIRO operation in Chile, in Santiago. So we work on adopting and adapting those technologies and that sort of thing. So government funding of technologies is small, but it's there. Will they increase? I doubt it. Over the years, there've been a couple of government initiatives designed to stimulate the development of the MET sector. Probably 15 years ago, I think in the Howard government, they put in place a thing called the Mining Services Action Agenda, which is where they put government money into a group of people who developed ways in which they could stimulate the development of the mining services sector. And the outcome of that was quite successful. In fact, that was the forerunner of getting quite a lot more momentum behind Austmine, and that was a great success. More recently, there's been METS Ignited. METS Ignited, again, was the beneficiary of an investment by the government in creating a centre that could stimulate the growth of and the development of and growth of innovative mining technologies. And again, that was quite successful. Will this government, whatever that government is, do the same thing? I doubt it. I really do. You know, I have a view that there's probably not enough of focus on mining in general in the political sense. So to then stick their neck out and money into things like mining services sector is something that won't happen. So the only other way to do it is to grow understanding by the folks that are already there, like those private equity companies I just mentioned, and there are a number of them that have been quite happy with the outcomes that they've got from investing in mining technology startups and helping them get to a commercial level where they're then moved on to another owner, and they've made their money on their way through. And there's a number of those examples where people have gone, you know what, this is a really interesting sector. We need to get in there and do more with it. So it's really in the latter sector that I see the future for more enthusiastic investment in startup in the technology sectors.
One last area I wanted to chat to you about, Alan, that I find quite interesting is the consequences on humans, on employment, on jobs in the industry. And it's kind of twofold, because we talked a lot about automation, and that obviously has implications of less people may be needed in future. But at the same time, if you speak to a lot of people in the industry, there's a dearth of talent coming through, and you see that reflected in unis with less and less mining courses and less people coming through. So how do you think about the actual, human role in the future of mining? Do we have enough people? Are you as concerned about this as others, or have you got a bit of a different perspective on it?
Well, it's a really interesting question, and it is almost the elephant in the room. So if I take the second part of that question first, and that is getting people interested in mining who want to go to university and do a mining-related course like mining engineering or geology and so forth, is becoming more and more challenging. The University of Wollongong have just closed their mining school, and that's a huge loss. Yeah, that was one of the most innovative mining schools probably in the world in the area of coal mining, and it's closed. It's gone. The University of New South Wales have a mining school, but it's a shadow of its former self. And I think in reality, the people that are doing mining engineering there are now part of another faculty. It's a mining engineering stream, but it's part of another faculty. The problem is, as you rightly say, making that attractive to people who want to go into it. So on the one hand, it's challenging because, you've got to say, what happens when all the mining engineers and geologists retire? There won't be any, and we won't have anybody to, come and tell us what to do. On the other hand, because technology is technology, people who want to work in the automation and data analytics and so forth, they're really interested in it. You don't employ a geologist in a data analytics environment, you employed a data scientist. So they're doing mathematics at university, and they become really proficient data scientists who can adapt themselves to the mining environment by looking at the data that they need. The same thing with automation and the stuff that we talked about, Matty, in terms of robotics. Robotics is a course at university now where very, very attractive, and a lot of people are doing it. So on the one hand, we've got a problem because we're not generating geos and mining engineers. On the other hand, we've got this really attractive opening up opportunity where we can attract people because it's really cool to go and do data analytics or robotics, whatever that word is that they use for robotics courses. So it's a challenge. I think the first part of the challenge really, Jonas, is how do we get more people interested in doing mining engineering? Because when the mining engineers all retire, I think we've got a problem.
Yeah, I think it could be a double. If there's not enough people come through, it could be a double whammy because if all this tech and automation comes out, like it actually might promote more mines to be created because there's a new benchmark at what costs you can operate at. Hopefully, oh geez, I'm going out on a whim saying costs to operate are going to go down in the future. But like with all this coming out, if you can have less people and more efficiency, like it should be cheaper to mine.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you totally.
I might look like a dickhead in 10 years when it's twice the price. Mate,
in any case, Matty, the pay for the people that remain in the industry could go upward, you know, if they're one of very few people left in the room.
Yeah.
They might have something to look forward to there.
Mate, Broome, that was awesome, mate. I suppose lead up to Brizzy, we should have done a raffle, a beer with Broome. If you go to the conference, we'll get a sit-down exclusive couple of schooners with Alan Broome. I might start that out, whether you want it or not. How many Austmine conferences have you been to now, Alan?
Well, this is the 20th Austmine conference. This one we're holding in May, and we started out when we did the very first one. We had quite a modest number of members of Austmine, and it was a relatively small affair. We're very, very proud of the fact that this Austmine conference is being held in conjunction, in partnership between Austmine and the AusIMM. So we've got a really strong group of people who have put together the program. We're looking at getting, hopefully towards 2,000 people attending. So it's a real benchmark, and we're very proud of the fact. And now, as of a discussion that we had today, we've got the Minerals Council of Australia as an integral supporter of this conference. So you've got the key industry, if you like, groups, AusIMM, MCA, or Minerals Council of Australia, and Austmine all working together because it's an industry-focused event for and on behalf of industry. So I'm very proud of the fact that, we started 20 years ago, and this is the anniversary one. So it's been an interesting journey, I can assure you.
Well, I'd encourage anyone that's listening, if you want to be part of the other 1,999 people that get to go meet Alan himself at GRX conference, Brisbane, 22nd of May. We've got exclusive discounts in the show notes. But Broome, I'll even let you use the discount, mate. $190 if you're a member. MOM's the code. $160 off if you're not a member for MOMNM. I'll flash it up on the screen. So, based on today's discussion, it sounds like it's going to be a friggin' fantastic event of what this the future dark mine might look like.
Yeah, well, I hope that those who attend at least get some validation of the comments that we've made today. This is an exciting place to be. The industry is an exciting industry to be part of, and I think GRX will give us the catalyst of showing people what that excitement looks like. So thanks for your support, fellas, and thanks for the interesting questions.
No worries. Geez, I'm thinking of trying to figure out getting the kids babysat. I might have to do a late attendance of this. I'll see. It's got me excited, mate. Thank you very much, mate, and we'd love to have you on again in future, and as a bit of a tech AI automation check-in. So we've got your number now, so you're in trouble.
Done. Thanks, guys. Really appreciate it. Thanks for all the effort.
Thanks, mate.
The information contained in this episode of Money of Mine is of general nature only and does not take into account the objectives, financial situation or needs of any particular person. Before making any investment decision, you should consult with your financial advisor and consider how appropriate the advice is to your objectives, financial situation and needs.